Okay, numbers are still creeping up, but they have slowed down. So let's get cracking. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm James Littman. I'm Managing Director of Tribe First. We are an equity crowdfunding marketing agency. And it's a real pleasure today to be hosting this webinar for Seafields. Hopefully you know a bit about Seafields by now, but just to give them a brief introduction, Seafields aims to drive a revolution in open ocean aquafarming. They're working to combat climate change and reduce humanity's dependence on oil. The open ocean holds a vast potential for sustainable solutions that can replace fossil fuel derived products. And Seafields is using an innovative approach by cultivating and harvesting sargassum seaweeds. You'll hear a lot about sargassum today, in open ocean farms to generate feedstocks for fossil fuel alternatives, as well as to sink the remaining carbon-rich biomass as a form of carbon capture. Seafields is raising on Crowdcube. They're currently 160% overfunded, and they're open to investment until the 23rd of May. So before I introduce you to the team, I'll just let you know a little bit about the format today. We've got 4 of the team that are going to each tell you a little bit about the different aspects of Seafields. And then after that, we will have a Q&A. Please do post your questions. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. If you don't have your questions answered, we will do our very best to, or Seafields will do their very best to get back to you after the webinar via email. If for any reason you've joined anonymously and you've got a question that's unanswered, please do feel free to email the team at investors@seafield.eco. That's investors@seafield.eco. Okay, great. Well, let's get on to the bones of it. You've not come here to hear me talk. I'd like to start by introducing you to Seafields CEO, John Auckland. He's also one of the co-founders. He's an experienced entrepreneur and public speaker. He set up his first company before 30, and he's run accelerators for the likes of the Branson family and Virgin Startup. Hi, John. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, James.
So I guess it'd be great to start at the very beginning. Could you tell us a little about the origin story of Seafields and how Seafields came to be?
Yeah, of course. So a little over 2 years ago, the Motley Band came together, inspired by our visionary founder, Victor Smetacek, who we're very fortunate is on the webinar with us today. And it all goes back to a now legendary podcast, episode 4 of the Sargassum podcast, where Victor was being interviewed by 2 of our co-founders, two of our colleagues, Mar Fernandez-Mendez and Francisca Elmer. And they were the hosts of the podcast. They invited Victor on as a guest, and he was being interviewed about his kind of life's work, really. And the culmination, I guess you could call it, of his life's work was the idea behind Seafields. So I was actually sent this podcast by another of our co-founders, Sebastian Stevens. He and I were looking into a solution for sustainable aviation fuel. And he sent me this podcast and said, watch this. And Victor starts talking about sargassum and its amazing, wondrous properties as a potential alternative to fossil fuels, because it has because it grows so prolifically. It has these long sugars that are quite hard to break down. It makes it quite suited to certain types of gasification that other biomass isn't so suited to. And so yeah, it can be used as an aviation or a shipping fuel. But the bit that really caught our attention is when Victor started talking about the idea of sinking the seaweed to the bottom of the ocean for permanent carbon removal. As you mentioned slightly earlier on in the session, I used to run accelerator programs for the Branson family. You can imagine when Richard Branson puts out on his social media channels that he wants impact entrepreneurs to send the pitch decks, he gets quite a lot of pretty impressive pitch decks. So I thought I had a pretty good grasp of the carbon removal, climate tech, environmental impact space. But watching this podcast just blew my mind. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. This is the solution to the climate crisis, amongst all the other solutions that I've potentially seen. And so the idea is you grow this incredibly fast-growing seaweed, sargassum. It can double in size in sort of 11 to 14 days in the wild, and in lab conditions we got it to be as few as 5 days. And because you can grow so much of it, naturally plant life photosynthesizes, draws down CO2. It's our best kind of CO2 tool, if you will. And so if you can just grow a lot of biomass really, really quickly, and then permanently remove it out of the biosphere by sinking it to the bottom of the ocean, then you can achieve a kind of scale that really isn't possible elsewhere. So that was the light bulb moment for me. That was when I realized this needed to be the thing I focused my efforts on. As I say, a little over 2 years ago, and we set up Seafields Solutions probably about a week after first watching that podcast.
Wow, very interesting origin story. So, so you're taking quite a unique approach to this this problem. I know we're going to hear about the technical aspects in a bit more detail later, but if you could just give us a brief overview, and also the ultimate goal and the benefits of what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm a businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a scientist or an engineer. We need a lot of very high quality scientists and engineers to come with us on this journey. I think there's a few unique elements. I mean, that origin story itself is the totem pole through which all these amazing people have gathered. That vision is, so to me, quite simple in many respects. So it's quite easy to visualize the carbon actually being removed from the atmosphere. You've got this, odorless, colorless gas that we need to get rid of. It's so intangible. How do you make that tangible? That's one of the challenges of the climate crisis. I think that's one of the advantages of Seafields methodology, both in terms of allowing the public to engage with it, to resonate with the idea, but also from what's known as MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification. This is, you go to all the conferences, and this is the big challenge in carbon removal, is how do you know that carbon's definitely been removed? Seafields has a massive advantage. We know it's been removed because it's in a bale of seaweed, it's at the bottom of the ocean, that we can go and look at if we really want to. And a lot of other carbon removal methodologies don't have that luxury. And I think the next thing for me really is the team, and this comes back to how good the idea is in the first place, that it's brought in these experts, as I mentioned. But we've got so many different challenges that we need to overcome simultaneously to make this idea work. That the idea needs to be so strong, it needs to be paradigm shifting in order to bring the right people in to overcome those challenges. And we've got Randall Purcell, one of our co-founders. He spent 20 years at the World Bank as head of their food security program, and more latterly a senior climate advisor for the UN. And so he looks at it from an angle of regulation, policymakers, food security. We're running out of space on land to grow biomass. We can't replace agricultural land. We're growing trees or other carbon removal sort of sinks because we're already running out of space. So he's looking at it from a perspective of the ocean brings us potential. We've got 3 different people within the team that have been involved in subsea telecoms cable laying projects. So Sebastian, our visionary sort of business founder, if you will, Eric and Russell, all 3 have worked in either cable laying or recycling out of service deep sea cables. So they know how to put stuff down at the bottom of the ocean and potentially pick it up if it's needed as well, and to monetize that. Then we've got some incredible young, enthusiastic, talented geniuses on the science side and the engineering side. So Fran, who I mentioned earlier, who's the co-founder and the host of the podcast, the Sargassum podcast, she's now come on board full time. She's made Sargassum her life work. She created a podcast around it, so she really sees its potential. She's now on board full time. Mars, a scientific advisor. She operates out of the Alfred Wegener Institute. Again, she's made Sargassum her life's work, having already looked at things like phytoplankton as a potential carbon removal method. We've got Dave Brooks, who's a senior marine engineer, has worked for decades in the oil and gas industry, is looking for ways to take out a lot of the CO2 put up there in the first place. And and yeah, a load of talented other individuals. I'm not going to name the people on this webinar because obviously they're going to speak for themselves. So also very, very talented people that we're just going to speak to.
Wow, it sounds like an incredible team, and you've got some quite ambitious plans as well, haven't you? I mean, how much carbon are you ultimately looking to capture, and what could the impact of that be for the planet?
We're looking to remove a gigaton of CO2 from the atmosphere within the next decade, and a lot of gigaton sort of scale potential projects, you know, are looking at trying to achieve that gigaton scale by 2050. We don't think that's enough. We don't think it's urgent enough. You know, we've got to remove it from the biosphere. You know, in the best case scenarios of carbon reduction, emissions reduction, you're still left with about 10 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere that we need to remove. You know, our kind of excess every year, if you will, is 35 gigatons. So even with really, really aggressive carbon removal, global carbon removal strategies in a way that we're definitely on a pathway to achieving, we have these unavoidable emissions. It's just the cost of humanity, if you will. So and then according to the IPCC, we need to remove 30% of historic anthropogenic carbon emissions as well. So this is the market that Seafields operates in, both those unavoidable emissions and removing historic emissions and permanently locking it away. And it's going to be a huge market. It's going to be $1 trillion market. And as I say, you know, I've looked at a lot of the stuff that's out there. I made the decision to go to Seafields, not follow any other pathway, because this one to me is the most scalable, the most realistic, the most plausible, the most sensible from a business model perspective, because it has, you know, the sort of dual revenue streams. It's not funded entirely by carbon credits. There are other subsidized revenue streams as well through product feedstocks, ultimately to stop digging oil out of the ground and have replacements for things like plastic and fuels. You need to grow a lot of biomass, and as we say, we can't do that on land. So the scale of this is huge. And as I think you mentioned, or as a lot of people probably on this webinar know, we talk about this idea that we need an area the size of Portugal to remove a gigaton. It's also, to put it in terms of states, it's like, I think it's West Virginia. I need to remember which one it is. It sounds like a big area, and that's kind of a good thing, right? Because also it is a big area. You need an area the size of Portugal to deal with an area the size of Germany's carbon emissions, right? So, you know, we have to aggressively decarbonize as well as do Seafields. So we're not giving polluters an excuse to pollute. But the reality is we do need to scale to that sort of size quickly. It's not going to be one big sort of homogenous farm the size of Portugal. In practicality, it's going to be lots of small sort of modular farms that collectively make up this sort of landmass. So it feels like this massively ambitious and potentially unobtainable goal, but it's not. We're trying to create an industry here, and that industry's prime focus being to you know, remove at least a gigaton of CO2 per annum.
Well, it's great. It sounds like you found a fantastic commercial pathway to doing something really positive. I think what I find particularly interesting is the ability to turn back the clock on some of these things as well, and I think that excites a lot of people. This feels like a really good point to go over to Victor Smetacek, who you mentioned earlier was really the muse for all of this in that podcast that you heard back from some time ago. Let me give Victor a brief introduction. He's a world-renowned expert in ocean ecology and carbon cycling. He's the visionary behind the Seafields floating sargassum aquafarm, and what he sees as the third agricultural revolution. Victor was born and grew up in India and won a scholarship to study marine biology in Germany. His passion for naturalism and desire to solve human society's problems culminated in the inspiration behind Seafields. Victor's a former professor of biooceanography at the University of Bremen and the receipt of numerous prestigious awards. Victor, it's a real pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. Could you start by highlighting the potential of open ocean farming? And from what I understand, this is going to take some pressure off land and coastal areas as well. Is that right? Sorry, Victor, you appear to be on mute.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and to convince a large audience about the necessity of what we intend doing. I have been working on the carbon cycles for 50 years now. And I started off by working on phytoplankton. These are the single-celled algae that populate the entire surface of the ocean. They're very small. They're so small that you cannot see them. You only see them when they color the water slightly. But they don't pack enough carbon. And I have been looking for ways and means of increasing their growth rates and their carbon sucking down capacities. But in 2013, I was invited by Nature to write a perspective article on a new phenomenon that had just started developing then. And this was this floating fields of sargassum outside the Sargasso Sea. So I researched that, and there was nobody else who was working on that topic at that time. And it turned out that the sargassum is the ideal vehicle to capture huge amounts of carbon and take it down. And the best thing about sargassum is it grows in the open ocean. And 50% of the planet's surface are ocean deserts. These are the subtropical gyres in the centers of the oceans, in the tropical oceans. And they're just deserts. There's nothing going on there. That's why you don't hear about them. You don't talk about them. And what we have been exploiting, the human race has been exploiting, are the ocean margins. And as you all know, they are under enormous pressure, and we have already severely impacted the ecosystems there. Now, these open ocean deserts, they're like the Sahara on land, right? There's nothing much going on there. There are no whales, there's hardly any fish, and just vast expanses. And they overlie, similarly, vast expanses of ocean deep sea floor, the abyssal plain, where there's also nothing going on. So when you hear about the deep sea, anything about the deep sea, it's always in places where you have productive waters above. So this would be also the ideal depot to sink the sargassum. So when I started working on the sargassum topic, I realized that the sargassum on the surface could be easily fertilized by bringing in pipes that would connect the nutrient-rich deep water, like pipes like wells, and you could irrigate the surface with the nutrients from the deep ocean. And simultaneously, you could also take oxygen down with downwelling pipes. So you would have a counterflow, and these pipes could then also be made out of the sargassum material. So the whole system would be autonomous. You would not be taking anything from land. You would have everything on the ocean. So this would be a whole new vision for the Anthropocene in which we are now. And it would really solve multiple problems without creating additional problems. So that's the idea. And I'm sure it's going to work, because all the principles that we will be tapping here are already there. You know, the water will flow by itself up and down. We will be also ventilating the oxygen minimum zones in the ocean simultaneously while growing the sargassum at the surface. We'll be creating food resources because, of course, these farms will attract a lot of fish. And we would be, it's a win-win-win situation. So I'll leave that for the moment for you to ask questions. Sounds too good to be true, to tell you the truth.
Thanks. I mean, it must be very exciting having an opportunity like this. You know, you've got years and years of research that have taken you to this moment. So to have a team around you to realizing it, I mean, that's a dream, right?
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks, Victor. I could sit and listen to you talk all day, actually, but unfortunately, we've only got a set amount of time. So again, I'm sure if anyone has any questions for Victor, just send them to the Seafields team and be more than happy to answer them. Or, of course, post them now, and we'll do our best to answer them here. Let's move on to Richard Willis, who is Seafields Ops Director and co-founder. He's the owner of extensive organic farming business in the UK, and he utilises concepts concept in regenerative and sustainable organic farming to tackle farming challenges. So Richard, I think there's an obvious question to start with. Can you tell us a bit about your farming background and how that's led you and motivated you to join Seafields?
I'll take you a step back before that, where I was actually, my origins were in a sort of design world. I was at an art college and looking at kind of overcoming, I guess, engineering and creative ideas. And that led into a sort of family farming business that was becoming organic. And for us, it's all about understanding the environment, what grows best in the landscape that we've got. We're constantly looking at the soil health, looking at what nature has got for us to grow and using that rather than fighting it with chemicals and pesticides. So what inspired me really about the project is really Victor himself. When we met him for the first time, it was really fascinating, and I was just really looking at it from a perspective of an interesting idea. But then as he was explaining about sargassum, and from my farming background, having some nature-based solution that is really about a weed that grows exponentially with nutrients. From a farming perspective, it's just the most incredible gift. We're constantly looking at ways to sort of keep nettles down and thistles down on the farm. We're looking at having free reign over an almost unlimited area with an organism that's been growing for thousands of years. It can double in biomass in a really short space of time with not a huge amount of nutrients. The end product can be oil-based derivatives. We can get bio-naphtha from it. We can make biostimulants for using on land-based farming systems. So taking away the nitrogen fertilizers, and the products are phenomenal. The space is there, the sunlight's there. So from my perspective, I was really becoming more and more committed and inspired by the team that we've got. We've got sort of young creative thinkers. We've got experienced people that have been working and have connections in the oil sector. And those guys really do know about engineering and offshore. And really, it's fantastic to be part of this team. And from my farming background, I'm constantly looking at how we keep it simple, how we make it commercially spread, work out all the logistics, and not get too tied up with technology, making it too complicated. We keep it simple, we keep it robust, and we keep it flexible. And we do it step by step, and we learn on the job.
It's always wonderful to hear when people's experience and passion converge, and that certainly sounds like where you are, Richard. And I can hear it when you talk about Seafields. Could you tell me a little bit about how the technologies Seafields has developed kind of sets them apart from other seaweed farming, or in fact other carbon dioxide removal methods?
Yeah, that's really looking at. Victor was talking about the gyres that we're looking to go and farm in. The surface is very salty. It's warm. There's not a lot of nutrients there. Our technology is about using the available nutrients at a depth of about 300 meters and upwelling them to the surface. So it's kind of like producing fertile areas and farming within that on the surface. There's nobody else in this sector. The thing that distinguishes us from anyone is scale. It's simply scale. There's not land mass that can come close to the areas available to farm sargassum in. There's not feedstocks available to replace oil. There's just not a bio feedstock that can even come close to replacing oil without taking up huge areas of land-based protein. So if you're looking at farming seaweeds around the edges of countries, that's already fragile, biodiverse, intense kind of area that you can't just go and massively farm, one species without having a huge impact. We're going to an area where there isn't a lot going on. There's, of course, there's some stuff going on, but when we've got large areas of seaweed growing underneath, that's habitat for other biodiversity to be living in as well. So there are positives too, and it will reflect the sunshine, which has a sort of cooling effect on the ocean surface, which is also a good thing.
It's incredible. You've talked about the scale and the size of the opportunity there, and of course John's talked us through the incredible team you've got. What's the kind of possibility here? How powerful force could this be for positive change?
I try not to go and think that far ahead. Thinking too far ahead is kind of quite daunting, and I just try and look at what are the challenges in front of us and go one step at a time. I know that Victor has been working all his life in this area, and it's not just the sea that he understands, it's the weather, it's land-based systems. He really does understand a lot of the global issues that are going on and the changes that are happening because he's seen it. I've noticed some change in my farming perspective, but really I'm kind of driven by what we're doing now, and I can obviously sense the potential of what we're doing, but it's a step-by-step process. Our first step is looking at farming in modules around the Caribbean. The Caribbean has influxes of sargassum where it's a problem, and we're looking at solutions of catching it, growing it, and then gradually producing a feedstock for commercial businesses using sargassum. If they're getting sargassum in a 1 week period of thousands of tons of it, and then nothing for a period of months throughout the rest of the year, it's a problem for them. So we're looking at having a solution for the sargassum that's going towards Caribbean islands, catching it, farming it, and turning that into product. But that's our number one step, is understanding sargassum. From my farming background, I know that that's our number one thing, is looking at what keeps it thriving, what keeps it alive, how we control it safely, how we farm it, and then gradually after that, we'll be taking it further offshore.
Thanks, Richard. So we've heard a lot, of course, about the potential environmental impact here. We've heard about the science underpinning this. We've heard about the kind of commercial case and also the farming aspect of it. But obviously, this is all underpinned by the engineering, which will allow this to happen. So I'm very happy to introduce Nico Schwehm, who is one of Seafields' environmental engineer. A little bit of background on Nico. Nico is a highly skilled engineer with a master's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Applied Science in Bremen. His current role at Seafield, he's responsible for designing and managing the constructions of barriers in the open ocean, as well as implementing the best practices for ongoing monitoring and data collection to ensure the success and sustainability of the company's aquafarming operations. Hi, Nico, thanks so much for joining us today. Could you start by telling us a little bit of the opportunities of using floating seaweed farms from an engineering perspective?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so yeah, to start back, the reason why I started to study environmental engineering was to design solutions for the environment and help it to get better. And when I then heard from the idea of Seafields, I was totally hooked, because in my opinion, it's the only solution and the best solution I heard about so far. So I'm really glad that I have the chance to work for it, and that I have the chance to make the designs. Yes, so to go to the designs, I'm at the moment in St. Vincent. It's the second field trip we do so far this year. The first one took place in the beginning, in January to February, where we focused on building a good structure for our offshore farms and to just improve the performance of it. And right now we're doing a growth trial on a bay that has quite the same current conditions like offshore, where we focus more on the biology side. And at the moment, yesterday we got our first results that we made sargassum grow on our farms within the last 4 weeks. So that's quite nice. And yes, yeah, the farms we have are quite unique. So it's something doesn't exist at the moment anywhere else. Yeah.
Fantastic, Nico. Well, that's really interesting, and it's great to see that how far Seafields has come, and obviously there's a huge amount of potential here. Thank you all. It's been incredibly interesting. I've got some questions now from the people listening in.